I planned my husband's 45th birthday surprise, then he walked in, kissing another woman, and everyone saw it happen. I planned a surprise party for my husband, and he came home kissing another woman, thinking no one was there. My husband's 45th birthday was supposed to be one of those nights we'd remember and talk about for years. Just not for the reason I thought it would be. I'd spent nearly a month secretly putting everything together, which is honestly a little ridiculous when you know how bad I am at keeping surprises to myself. I stashed decorations in my sister's garage, ordered a cake from a small bakery on the other side of town, and even got my mother-in-law to travel in from out of town without letting him know. This birthday felt more important than the others because his father had died at 41. As my husband got closer to turning 45, he started acting a little different. Nothing dramatic exactly, but he was quieter and more restless, almost like the number itself was hanging over him. The plan was pretty straightforward. I told him I was staying at my sister's because she was having a difficult week and didn't want to be by herself. My sister agreed to back me up if he called, although she kept warning me. He's going to know. You lie like a nervous child. He didn't know. If anything, he looked almost relieved when I told him. Else he had a work dinner that evening, and in the same casual way he'd been mentioning things lately, he told me he had a business trip coming up 3 days later. I remember standing at the kitchen counter tying ribbons around little paper favor bags, thinking the timing couldn't have worked out better because I'd have plenty of time to clean everything up while he was away. Then he kissed me on the cheek, grabbed his coat, and said, "Don't stay up too late at your sister's." One of his oldest friends worked at the same company, and I'd asked him to help me keep track of the timing that night. He was at the dinner for the first part of the evening, so after my husband left, he texted me that he was heading home. His first message said, "He's had a few. He's walking fine, but he's definitely feeling it." Then, maybe 45 seconds later, another message popped up. "Also, I don't know if this is anything, but he's been weird lately. I'll tell you later." I stared at that second message much longer than I probably should have. I didn't want to ruin the surprise by getting inside my own head over one vague comment. So I shoved my phone into my pocket and went back into the living room. Everyone was hiding. My mother-in-law was crouched beside the couch even though I'd specifically told her she didn't actually need to crouch. And my sister was trying not to laugh because one of our friends kept whispering that his knee was locking up. The house was dark with only a thin strip of light coming in from the hallway. I stood closest to the front door because I wanted to be the first person to see his expression when the lights came on. Then a car pulled into the driveway. A second set of headlights stopped near the curb. I heard one engine shut down and then the other followed. 2 car doors opened almost at the same time. Footsteps came up the front walk, followed by my husband's voice, low and loose from drinking. I couldn't make out what he was saying. Then I heard a woman laugh. It wasn't my sister, it wasn't my mother-in-law, and it wasn't anyone hiding in that room. I reached toward the wall for the light switch, but before my fingers could touch it, the front door opened, and my husband walked inside with a woman practically attached to him. One of his arms was wrapped around her waist while both of her hands were gripping the front of his shirt. Before either of them even realized the living room was packed with people, he leaned down and kissed her. Someone behind me shouted, "Surprise!" The light snapped on and the entire room fell completely silent. My husband pulled away from the woman so suddenly that he nearly lost his balance. She stumbled backward, looked around the room, and immediately went pale. My mother-in-law stood beside the couch with both hands covering her mouth. My sister whispered something, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. I was staring straight at my husband, and he was looking at me like I'd somehow broken into his house and caught him doing something I wasn't supposed to see. "I can explain," he said. I laughed. I didn't mean to laugh. It just came out as this awful little sound that didn't even feel like it belonged to me. The woman ran both palms down the front of her dress, smoothing it out. Her dress was dark blue. One of her earrings was twisted backward, and she had the look of someone who had just realized she'd walked into the wrong apartment. My husband rubbed his forehead and said, "This isn't what it looks like." My sister actually whispered, "Oh, come on." Eventually, I asked the only question that came to mind. "Who is she?" He opened his mouth, closed it again, and glanced over at the woman. That's when his friend from work came through the doorway behind them. He'd followed in his own car because he knew about the surprise. The second he saw the woman, he stopped dead. "Oh," he said quietly, "just enough." I turned toward him. "You know her?" The look that crossed his face was recognition mixed with guilt. "She works with us," he said carefully. My husband immediately cut him off. "Don't." His friend stared at him. "Seriously?" I looked directly at his friend. "Seriously? What do you mean? I've seen them getting lunch together a lot. I figured maybe they were working on something. They disappear into his office, but that's normal at work." I didn't know. My husband snapped back, "You don't know anything." "No?" The woman looked at him and started to say, "You said..." But he turned toward her so quickly that she stopped mid-sentence. And there it was again. That instinct he had to control the room, to decide who talked and when. At the time, I told myself it was just panic. Later, I realized panic didn't explain how practiced he was at doing it. I looked at the woman and asked, "What did he say?" Finally, she said, "He told me you two were basically over." My ears started ringing as my husband said my name. I raised one hand. "No, you don't get to say my name like I'm the one making this awkward." My mother-in-law finally moved. She walked straight over to him and said, "Tell your wife the truth." He looked at his mother, and instead of breaking down or apologizing, his expression hardened. Can everyone stop turning this into a show? A show? That's what he called it. There were balloons behind him with his age printed all over them, a table packed with food I'd spent 2 days preparing, and a birthday cake that had cost more than I really wanted to admit. I'd invited his family, his friends, people from our neighborhood, and this man had just walked straight into the middle of all of it while kissing another woman. Somehow, though, I was the one supposedly creating the scene. We'd been married for 9 years. And if you'd asked me before that night whether my husband was controlling, I would have said no. Technically, that answer would have been honest, but it would have been completely wrong. He never told me I wasn't allowed to leave the house. He never inspected what I wore before I went somewhere. He never did any of the obvious things most people imagine when they hear the word controlling. What he did was much smaller, much quieter, and a lot easier to explain away. A few years into our marriage, he got promoted, and we moved because of his job. At the time, I was working as a receptionist at a medical office. It wasn't some glamorous career, but I genuinely liked the people there, and I liked having money deposited into an account that was mine. After we moved, he suggested that I take a couple of months off to get the house organized and figure out what I actually wanted to do next. "It'll be good for you," he told me. "You've been working since you were a teenager." I believed him. A few months later, I started applying for jobs again, but somehow he had an opinion about every single one. One didn't pay enough. Another had a commute that would eat up too much money in gas. Another required weekend hours, and weekends were basically the only time we really had together. Another job required business clothes, and he sat down with me and worked out exactly how much I'd have to spend just to look professional compared to what the job would pay. He wasn't cruel about it. That was what made it so hard to recognize. Eventually, I started applying less often. Then I stopped telling him when I found a job that actually interested me because I already knew the speech I'd get. Before long, what was supposed to be a temporary break from work had quietly become my permanent role. He worked, I took care of the house, he handled the bills, and I trusted him. The house was another thing I'd never completely understood. It had belonged to his father, and after his father died, my husband always talked about it as though it were his. He paid the property taxes, handled the insurance, and arranged for repairs. I knew his mother still had some kind of connection to the property, but I never asked exactly what that meant. He always told me he was taking care of everything with her. My own mother wasn't exactly the person who would have encouraged me to question him either. I grew up hearing that marriage was private and that a good wife didn't bring outsiders into every disagreement. If my father made a decision without consulting her, she'd shrug and say, "Sometimes you let a man feel like the man." So there I was, standing in the middle of my husband's 45th birthday party from hell, inside a house I'd always believed belonged to him with no job, no personal savings I could easily access, and no real idea how much money we even had. The affair was terrifying, obviously, but almost just as frightening was the realization that I had no idea what leaving him would actually look like. I didn't have time to sit with that thought because he made everything worse right there in front of everyone. He told me to stop making a scene and move away from the doorway. "Excuse me?" He gestured toward the hallway. "I'm not doing this with an audience. We can talk later." My mother-in-law immediately stepped between us. "She's not going anywhere. Mom, stay out of this." "No." I'd never heard her say that word to him that way before. He let out one short, sharp laugh. "This is my house." My mother-in-law stared at him for maybe 2 seconds before answering. "No, it isn't." The room went so quiet you could have heard a glass shatter. "What?" She pointed toward the ceiling, then down at the floor beneath our feet. "This house is mine. It's been mine since your father died. You know that? You handle the bills because I allowed you to handle them." He didn't look confused. He looked furious. I turned toward him. "You knew?" He didn't answer me. His mother kept going. "You don't get to stand here and order your wife out of my house." His face turned red. "Why are you doing this right now?" "Because you brought your girlfriend to your wife's surprise birthday party." "It's not that simple." "It looks pretty simple from where I'm standing." Oh, he started pacing. "Everyone needs to leave." Nobody moved. Then he looked at me again. I said, "We'll talk when this isn't a circus." "You walked into the circus kissing a woman from work." I didn't know people were here. I just stared at him. Then I realized he'd actually hurt himself with that sentence, and I could see it in his expression for half a second. So if we weren't here, it would have been fine? That's not what I said. Then what did you say? He rubbed both hands over his face. I'm 45. I've been thinking about my life, about Dad, about how he didn't even make it to this age. His mother suddenly went completely still, but he kept talking anyway. I spent years doing what everybody expected. I got married, took on the job, kept the house running, handled everything, and eventually woke up one day, realizing I didn't even know if this was the life I wanted. You're using your dead father to explain why you cheated on me. I'm explaining where my head has been. No, you're wrapping it in a sad little story so you can feel profound. Behind me, my sister made a sound that might have been a cough hiding a laugh. He shot her a glare, then looked back at me. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You always have to turn everything into an attack. The birthday cake was sitting on the dining table maybe 4 feet away from me. 2 layers, chocolate filling, his favorite frosting, little gold decorations, the whole thing. I'd spent more money on it than I should have because I wanted his birthday to feel special. I picked it up. My sister immediately said, "Don't." Naturally, that made me want to do it even more. I walked straight over to him and shoved the cake into his chest instead of his face. Frosting burst across the front of his shirt and some of it splattered onto the woman's dress. She gasped. "What the hell?" "Sorry, I guess I'm making a scene." My husband stared down at the frosting covering his shirt, then slowly looked back at me. In a very quiet voice, he said, "You're unbelievable." Somehow that hurt more than if he'd screamed at me. The woman grabbed a pile of napkins and started wiping frosting from her dress. She was angry now, too. "You told me you barely spoke." I froze. "Not now," he said. She ignored him. "You said you were basically separated." I turned toward her. "We had breakfast together this morning." Oh, her expression changed. I kept going because once I started talking, I couldn't seem to stop. "He kissed me before work. We picked out a new lamp last weekend. Yesterday, he asked me if I wanted to go visit my sister next month. Is that what he told you separation looked like?" My husband said my name again, this time much more sharply. The woman stared at him. "You said she knew." "I knew what?" She hesitated. "That things were over." I shook my head. "They weren't over." He stepped between us. "Enough." I moved around him. "How long?" She swallowed. "A few months." My stomach dropped. His friend, still near the front door, admitted, "I saw them getting lunch." He said a lot. I should have said something, but I didn't know. My husband snapped, "Because there was nothing to know." The woman turned on him. "Are you kidding me?" I stepped toward her and my friend grabbed my arm. "Hey, no." I pulled away and immediately felt embarrassed. My mother-in-law looked at her son and said, "Go upstairs, change your clothes, and then leave." "You can't be serious." "I am. This is between me and my wife." "Then maybe you shouldn't have brought another woman into the house." After that, the remaining guests slowly started leaving. One friend hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. His friend stayed a few minutes longer, apologized to me twice, and left looking miserable. The woman eventually went outside, and through the window, I could see her standing near the curb with her arms crossed, staring at her phone. My husband went upstairs covered in cake, and I sat at the dining table staring at the empty space where the cake had been. That's the image that stayed with me more than anything else from that night. Not the kiss, not the look on his face, but that empty cardboard circle smeared with frosting, sitting in the middle of all the decoration. My sister sat down beside me. "Come home with me. You don't have to stay here tonight. I don't know where else I'm supposed to be." My mother-in-law quietly said, "Here. You're supposed to be here." I looked at her, and for the first time all night, I cried. About 25 minutes later, my husband came downstairs wearing clean clothes and carrying a small suitcase, packed far too neatly for something thrown together in less than half an hour. Then I remembered the business trip he'd mentioned earlier. "You already had that packed?" "It's for work." "Sure." He pointed at my shirt, still covered in frosting. "You need to calm down. You assaulted me in front of people with a cake." And annoyingly, he wasn't completely wrong about that part. "You brought another woman into our house," I said. "I know what I did." "Do you?" He picked up his coat. "I'm going to stay in a hotel for a few days. We'll talk when you're capable of having a normal conversation." I stood up. "You don't get to judge my reaction after I found out you're cheating on me." Then he looked toward his mother. "Are you really going to let her stay here after that?" "Yes." He gave one short, bitter laugh. "Unbelievable." Then he walked out the door. The woman was still outside waiting. They talked near the car for less than a minute, then got into separate cars and drove away. I stood at the window watching his taillights disappear, and I had the strangest thought. I suddenly realized I had no idea which parts of the last few months had been real. My mother-in-law stayed that night, and so did my sister. I barely slept at all. The next morning, I got out of bed because the refrigerator looked ridiculous, packed with party food, but nothing normal to eat. I wanted eggs, bread, coffee, something simple enough to remind me the world was still there. My mother-in-law came to the grocery store with me. When the cashier finished ringing everything up, I handed over the card I always used. It was declined. I asked her to try again. Declined a second time with people waiting behind me. I opened the banking app on my phone but couldn't see the main account details because the account wasn't actually mine. My card was just an additional card connected to his account. I called the number on the back of the card, and after several minutes of automated menus, I found out that the spending limit on my card had been reduced. He hadn't just left the house. Sometime between walking out the door and that morning, he had made sure I couldn't spend money the way I normally did. I put half the groceries back. My mother-in-law offered to pay, and I refused at first out of embarrassment, until she said, "Please don't make me argue with you in front of the bananas." Once we got back to the parking lot, I called my mother. I told her everything: the affair, the party, the cake, the card being declined. There was a long silence. Finally, "I know he was wrong." Even before she finished, I knew there was going to be a but. "But you didn't need to humiliate him in front of everyone. You shoved a cake into him in front of his mother and his coworker. He walked into his own house kissing another woman." "I said he was wrong," she replied. Like he'd just gotten a parking ticket. "You've always had a temper. Remember when you were 17 and you threw that glass into the sink?" I laughed because if I hadn't, I probably would have screamed. I'm saying this didn't come out of nowhere, and there it was. My entire childhood summed up in one sentence. Someone would hurt me, I'd react badly, and my reaction would become the thing everyone focused on. I ended the call and didn't answer when she called back or started sending messages. My mother-in-law sat quietly beside me, then said, "I used to do that to him too. Make excuses. If he was rude, I'd tell myself he was tired. If he made everything about himself, I'd tell myself he was under pressure. I thought I was being a supportive mother." When we got back, she finally explained the property situation properly. The house had originally belonged to her husband. After he died, the title transferred to her. She moved away, let her son stay in the house, and eventually let both of us live there. He handled the paperwork because he was local and good with it, but he had never actually owned the house, not even secretly. He always called it his house. I know. And you never corrected him? It seemed harmless. Nothing is harmless when the same person gets to define everything. I told her more about our finances than I'd ever told her before, how he discouraged me from working, how I didn't know our savings, how I had no idea what debts we had. She looked genuinely shocked. "I thought you wanted to stay home." "I thought I wanted that too eventually." She reached toward me. "You can stay here." "For how long?" "We'll figure it out." "I don't want charity. It's my house, and I'm not giving him the power to throw you out of it just because he's angry." Then she added, "I love him. I'm not going to pretend I don't, but loving him doesn't mean helping him do this." A few days later, I met with a lawyer by myself. She started with the basic questions. "Do you know which accounts you have together?" "Not exactly." "The balances?" "No." "Any retirement accounts? Personal loans? Credit card debt?" "I don't know." 4 times in a row. She didn't judge me, which somehow made me feel worse. Finally, "You need to stop being embarrassed about what you don't know and start finding out." That sentence became my entire personality for the next month. I opened a bank account in my own name, deposited what little I had, and felt strangely emotional seeing only my name on it. I changed my email password, then spent an entire afternoon resetting every account he'd always logged into for me. The house situation had to be handled carefully too. My first instinct was to change the locks immediately, but the lawyer warned me not to turn a dispute into a bigger problem. She advised my mother-in-law, as the actual owner, to put in writing what access she was allowing him and arrange a time for him to collect his things. Once everything was documented, the locks were changed, and we installed a camera at the front door. Not because I thought he'd kick it down, but because I didn't trust him not to show up and turn it into another argument. He hated the camera. His message came late that night. "You need to stop acting like you own that house." "I don't. Your mother does. She'll come around." That sentence chilled me more than a threat would have. It told me exactly how he viewed his own mother. Not someone who'd made a decision he disagreed with, but someone temporarily malfunctioning who'd eventually return to doing what he expected. The next morning, his friend called, sounding nervous. "There's something I should tell you. The woman from the party works directly under him. He had authority over her assignments, feedback, scheduling, and performance reviews." "Did you ever see him favor her?" "I don't know. That's why I didn't say anything. But the relationship itself could be a problem." I sat with that for hours, then called my lawyer. She asked what I was hoping would happen. "I want there to be a consequence." She warned me that if he lost his income, the financial side of the divorce could actually get more complicated for me. There was no guaranteed neat ending where he got fired and I somehow came out ahead. I spent 4 days going back and forth. My sister said yes immediately. My mother-in-law wasn't so sure. "Are you sure you want to involve his job? You think I should protect him?" I didn't say that. I'm still his mother. I can believe what he did was wrong and still not enjoy watching his entire life fall apart. That shut me up because she was right. I'm sorry. I just want you to think before you do something you can't undo. So I thought about it, and then I reported it. I didn't send some dramatic message or make accusations I couldn't prove. I simply explained what I'd personally witnessed. He'd brought a woman from work to our house, kissed her in front of several people, and during the confrontation, she said they'd been involved for a few months and that she reported directly to him. I included my contact information, hit send, and immediately felt sick. For the next week, nothing happened that I could see. Life became paperwork and awkward text messages. Most of his messages were about his belongings. I need the black coat. I need the folder from the desk. Then he'd slip something emotional in. You really think this is all on me? You seem pretty comfortable living in my family's house. You're enjoying this. I wasn't. I could be furious with him and still be miserable. I could want consequences and still miss the person I thought he'd been. A few weeks after the party, the day arrived for him to collect the rest of his things. My mother-in-law came over so I wouldn't have to be alone with him. When he arrived, he looked thinner. That irritated me too. Somehow after blowing up our entire life, he still got to look tragic. You packed everything? Most of it. He lifted the lid of one box, saw folded shirts, a framed photograph, some old books. So that's it? 9 years in boxes? You left. You made it pretty clear I wasn't welcome. You brought your girlfriend home. She isn't my girlfriend. Great update. He loaded the boxes into his car, and by the last few, he just looked exhausted. Before he left, you're acting like none of this hurts you. It does. It just doesn't mean I want you back. After he drove away, I cried so hard I had to sit down on the bathroom floor. About a month later, my mother-in-law got a phone call. I listened for maybe 15 seconds before her expression changed completely. She stepped into the hallway, and my husband was apparently loud enough that I still caught pieces of the conversation through the thin walls. When she came back, she sat down slowly. He was fired. The company had investigated the relationship, reviewed their messages, and discovered he'd never disclosed it. There were also concerns about performance evaluations he'd completed for her while they were involved. Did they say he changed her evaluations? I don't know. He was yelling. He said they claimed there was a conflict of interest. Apparently, that was enough for him to blame me completely. Not the affair, not the fact he'd been involved with someone he directly supervised without disclosing it. Me. Then he asked his mother for money. She said no. She offered to help him find a temporary room or a cheaper apartment. He refused. Said he wasn't moving into some depressing little place like a college student. Then I guess he's not that desperate, I said. A few days later, he let it slip that the woman from work had stopped seeing him once the investigation began. My lawyer had warned me his job loss could make the financial negotiations more complicated, and she was right. Suddenly, my husband acted like every dollar I might receive was proof of how cruel I'd been to him. I kept reminding myself I hadn't fabricated anything. I'd reported facts. But I also had to be honest. I hadn't reported him because I was suddenly passionate about workplace ethics. I reported him because I wanted someone besides me to look at what he'd done and say, this has consequences. The divorce dragged on for months, mostly because getting a complete picture of our finances took much longer than I'd expected. Then, one afternoon, my lawyer called and said, we found something you need to see. There was a savings account in my husband's name alone. It wasn't illegal, wasn't some magical hidden fortune, wasn't offshore. It was just a regular savings account I had never known existed, with more in it than I had in my brand new little account. The deposits went back years. For years, he'd told me we had to be careful with money, that a receptionist's salary wouldn't add enough to justify me working, that we couldn't afford certain trips, that he was the responsible one because he understood money better than I did. All that time, he'd been quietly moving money into an account I didn't even know existed. At mediation, he tried to explain it. I was saving, for us. Then why didn't I know about it? He looked at the mediator instead of me. Because she gets emotional about money. I laughed. My lawyer gently put a hand on my arm. I was trying to be responsible. Somebody had to. Responsible. It had become his favorite word whenever he wanted to make control sound like something he was doing for my benefit. My lawyer asked where the deposits came from. Salary, transfers, savings accumulated over time. No secret crime. No hidden inheritance. Just money that built up during our marriage while he deliberately kept me unaware of it. Then he brought up the cake. We're sitting here pretending she's the calm and reasonable one, but she attacked me in front of everyone. With frosting. My lawyer gave me a look, so I shut up. The mediator told him to stay focused, but he kept going. It shows her behavior. She loses control. My lawyer didn't deny that part, which surprised me. Instead, she said, my client reacted impulsively during an extremely humiliating and emotional situation. She acknowledges that an isolated incident involving a cake does not change the classification of funds accumulated during the marriage. I realized that's what it feels like when someone doesn't need to pretend you're perfect in order to defend you. If I raised my voice, suddenly the volume was the problem. If I cried, I was unstable. If I got angry, the conversation somehow became about my tone instead of what caused the anger. The cake was stupid. I knew that, but I still deserved to know the truth about my marriage. Both things could be true at the same time. After several more weeks, we finally reached an agreement. I received a portion of the money saved during the marriage, along with a fair share of the other marital assets. It wasn't life-changing, but it was enough to let me breathe again. Once the legal side was over, I had no excuse left to avoid the part I'd been dreading most: work. My resume looked like it had been abandoned in another decade. During my first interview, the manager asked why I'd been out of the workforce so long. I froze, and instead of the answer I'd practiced, I said, "My husband's job moved us, and I ended up staying home longer than I planned." Then heard how small that sounded and kept explaining too much. I knew I'd messed it up before I even reached the car. I sat there and cried for 7 minutes, then got angry at myself for crying, then laughed because apparently this was becoming my new process for dealing with everything. The first job I found was temporary work at a small retail shop. The pay wasn't great, the schedule changed weekly, and I loved it. More than anything, I loved having a schedule with my own name on it, loved clocking in, loved knowing exactly how much I'd earned. I signed up for a short administrative refresher course, paid for it myself, and almost walked out on the first night because everyone else seemed faster than me and knew software I'd barely touched. But I stayed. A few months later, I interviewed for an administrative position, and when asked about the gap, I didn't panic. I stepped away from paid work after a family move. I've recently returned, completed updated training, and I'm looking for something stable where I can rebuild. I got the job. The morning my first paycheck hit my account, I sat in my car staring at the balance. Thought I should check if it's okay, then realized there was nobody left to ask. I bought the shoes I needed. They weren't expensive, but they were mine, and that made the purchase feel bigger than it should have. My relationship with my mother remained strained. Her messages were half apology, half lecture. "I'm sorry you felt unsupported, but I was only worried about how angry you were." Eventually, I replied once, "I'm not discussing my reaction anymore as a way to avoid discussing what he did. If you want a relationship with me, stop making me responsible for protecting him from the consequences of his choices." She didn't respond for 3 days, then finally, "I need time." I thought, take it. My former mother-in-law and I had grown much closer through everything that happened. I know he hurt you, but he's still my son. I know. Neither of us needed the other to pretend everything was simple. By then, I'd been living in her house for months, and it started to feel less like survival and more like something I needed to move past. I had a job now and money from the settlement, so I started looking at apartments. Small ones. The first had a kitchen so narrow that opening the fridge blocked the entire walkway. The second smelled like it had been smoked in for 100 years. The third was clean, quiet, and a little more expensive than I wanted. I stood measuring a wall with my phone and realized I was smiling. I could picture my own things there. I signed the lease. When I told my former mother-in-law, she got teary-eyed. "I was hoping you'd stay longer." "I know, but I'm proud of you." "Don't make it emotional. You shove one cake into someone and suddenly you're afraid of emotion." I laughed so hard I nearly choked. By the time I started packing, a little over a year had passed since the party. One evening, she got a message from my ex-husband. "He knows you're leaving." "How?" I told him, "and he wants to move back in." "Seriously?" "He says it doesn't make sense for the house to sit empty." I started laughing, not because it was funny, but because it was so completely him, still looking at that house like something temporarily taken from him. "What are you going to say?" I already said no. He thinks I'm punishing him. "Are you?" "Maybe a little, but mostly I don't want to go back to how things were." I let him treat that house like it belonged to him, and I don't think that helped him. She'd even offered to help with a couple months of rent somewhere else. He said no, of course he did. Of course. My move took most of the weekend. My sister helped, and my former mother-in-law supervised the boxes like she was running a shipping warehouse, sneaking extra kitchen towels into my car. The furniture was a mixture of things from the divorce and things I'd bought since, and for some reason, that distinction mattered to me more than it probably should have. On the final afternoon, I stood alone in the old bedroom. I expected the memories to hit hard, but they arrived as ordinary little moments instead. Folding laundry, arguing about a broken air conditioner, lying awake beside him while he snored. That was harder than remembering the betrayal. The marriage hadn't been fake every second. It had been real to me, and I had to grieve that without turning the grief into a reason to go back. That evening, I got a message from him. "I hope you're happy. You turned my own mother against me." There were a dozen responses running through my head. Instead, I read it one more time and archived it. No response. My first night in the apartment was complete chaos. Boxes everywhere, no curtains, a fridge that clicked every few minutes. I ate takeout sitting on the floor, looked around, and thought, this is mine. A few days later, I found a small kitchen table, and standing in the store looking at the price tag, I caught myself doing the same mental calculation I'd done for years. And can I afford it? Yes. Do I need permission? No. Should I wait for someone else to decide? No. So I bought it. I put it together badly, took half of it apart, swore more than I should have, and finally got it right. Then I sat there with a cup of coffee and opened my banking app. My rent had cleared. My paycheck had arrived. My balance wasn't huge, but I knew exactly what I owed and exactly what I had. That still felt almost unbelievable. The following weekend, my former mother-in-law came over carrying a plant I didn't need and food I did. She ran her hand along the table's edge. Nice. I built it. Don't inspect it. I didn't say anything. You were about to. For a while, we talked about normal things. Eventually, he's still angry with me. He thinks I chose you. Did you? I chose not to keep choosing for him. That sentence stayed with me. I still get angry too quickly sometimes. I still catch myself over-explaining purchases in my own head. I still have days when some tiny thing reminds me of that party and my stomach drops. And yes, I still hate blue dresses more than any normal person probably should. Sometimes I wonder whether reporting him at work was the right thing to do for the right reason. I know the facts I reported were true. I also know part of me wanted him to hurt. Both of those things can be true at the same time. The biggest difference now is that I don't spend my entire day editing my own feelings into something easier for somebody else to live with. When I'm angry, I try not to throw cake. Progress. When I'm scared about money, I check my account instead of asking someone else what we can afford. When my mother sends a message drifting back toward the old blame, I stop responding. When my former mother-in-law defends some small thing about her son, I remind myself she's allowed to love him without agreeing with him. And when my ex-husband sends something clearly designed to pull me into another argument, I usually leave it alone. Usually. One quiet evening after I'd finally settled into the apartment, I finished unpacking the last box in the living room, mostly books, framed photographs, and things I'd kept because throwing them away felt too dramatic. I put a few on the shelf and checked my phone. There were no messages I needed to answer. Then I checked my bank account one last time and saw that the rent had been paid with money I'd earned myself. I turned off the living room light. There was nothing dramatic about the moment, just a quiet apartment, a slightly crooked kitchen table, and the strange, almost unfamiliar feeling of knowing that every decision made inside those walls was finally mine.